Audio Jungle.
If someone casually mentioned the word terrorism to an American, chances are that the mind of the American will automatically default to the 9/11 attacks, which to date stands as the worst ever terrorist attack to ever take place on US soil. The leader of the Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, was believed to be hiding in Afghanistan with the help of the Taliban. All efforts by the US government to have the Taliban hand him over were nowhere close to successful. Today, QFIC's weekly show addresses nothing else but the Taliban and their whole takeover of Afghanistan. My name is Edwin Austin. By calling me QFIX, you still get to have my undivided attention. I will be your host. 20 years, 4 US presidents, trillions of dollars spent, many lives lost, if not eternally scarred. Would you call this mission accomplished? Well, I know that some of you have probably heard of the Taliban. I mean, they are the reason why most newsrooms have a funny looking translator hanging nearby. But I'd like to take you through a short history class. There will be no cut at the end of it all. I promise. When the Soviet Union left Afghanistan in the late 1980s, well, tribal leaders were fighting to have control of Afghanistan, a thing that resulted in the emergence of a civil war that lasted years. In the year 1994, it became apparent that a militia going by the name the Taliban actually had the reins. The Taliban were not just any tribal group. The Talibans were actually more diverse and included other extremists, not just from Afghanistan, but also from Pakistan itself. From then on, Afghanistan was under the rule of the Taliban. This went on for years and years. The better part of the 1990s, the Taliban had control of Afghanistan. Things, however, changed when it came to the year 2001. The infamous 9/11 attacks, which are arguably the worst terrorist attack to ever take place on US soil, happened, and the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, was believed to be hiding in Afghanistan with the help of the Taliban. The then US President, George Bush, asked the Taliban to hand Osama bin Laden over to them. But his requests were as productive as asking Babu Owino to betray Raila. I mean, some things can't happen, can they? The Taliban did not just say no to the US with no reason. What they stated was that they will only hand over Osama bin Laden to the US government if the US government can indeed provide evidence that Osama bin Laden's group, Al-Qaeda, was the one behind the 9/11 attacks. The US government was not ready to negotiate with Al-Qaeda. For that reason, George Bush sent US troops into Afghanistan. 3 years later, Afghanistan had a new constitution, a new president, and the Taliban had run into hiding. From then on, the US troops remained in Afghanistan to ensure that the Taliban did not try to stage a coup and take over, the governance. So the US troops remained in Afghanistan, training the Afghan army so that whenever it is that they were going to leave, well, the Afghan army would be well equipped with the skills and the requisite ammunition to fight the Taliban. They have been there for the last 20 years. Taliban have been in hiding for the last 20 years, although their reach and scope has been growing over the years. But the fact that the US government had control over the bigger cities like Kabul and even the airports and all, well, Afghanistan were not that recognized. That's why there were not so many stories about the Taliban before. But now, in April this year, the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, declared that US troops were going to leave Afghanistan by the 31st of August this year. This was in line with an agreement made by the former president Donald Trump with the Taliban that the US troops would leave Afghanistan. The very second Joe Biden made the decision to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan public, well, I believe that is when the Taliban started to dust off their shoes, pack their trucks, and I believe some decided to book rooms in Kabul, rooms with balconies with views to the airport, so that they can have a look at some of these scenes. Security agencies all across the world would have made their cases as to why the Taliban would not take over the whole of Afghanistan. And by the time it would have taken them to explain it all out, well, the Taliban were already in the presidential palace. Other people have been scrambling in banks in an effort to take the little saving that they had left, with others even stockpiling. I mean, we thought that stockpiling because of a pandemic was bad, but if anything, Afghanistan has proven that things could have been worse. The greatest concern that has been brought forth by many people out there is the fact that the Taliban are known to not only oppress but discriminate women. Back in the 90s, when they ruled with an iron fist, well, women were not allowed any sort of education. Women's health was restricted. Women could not go out on the streets without being accompanied by a male relative. It was prohibited for any woman to walk on the streets with a man that is not their relative. Women had to use special buses, to get to where they were going. Another one that shocked me was that women had to paint over their windows so that the people outside could not see the women inside their own homes. The Taliban this time round have said that women will be accorded the rights they deserve in accordance to the Sharia law. Whether this is true or false, I guess only time can tell. But that was the greatest concern of, this whole Taliban takeover. They are known to discriminate a lot against women. And back in the days, women did not even have a voice. They were just silent because you try to, as little as lift your finger, well, you are either beaten to a pulp or killed. Although, as we have seen in the recent protest, women are actually standing up to these Taliban. These are women protesting. They believe they have a right, which they do, and they are asking the Taliban to acknowledge that. The unfoldings taking part in Afghanistan has forced us to sideline everything else and give priority to this Taliban story in this week's episode of QFix Weekly Show. I am hoping it was worth it. I have seen clips and pictures that I would never even think possible to witness in a movie. I mean, aside from London Has Fallen. I mean, this thing was an all other level. What I am trying to drive home today is this. The US presence in Afghanistan kept the Taliban at bay, and by now it's obvious that whenever it is the US troops were to withdraw, whether 5, 10 or 20 years later, the Taliban were still going to rise and demand power. As I was writing this, and even as I share it with you today, I must admit I was, in the truest form of the word, shocked. The US decision to leave Afghanistan was not a wrong decision. If anything, we should be thanking them for the 20 years that they have kept the nation afloat. And yet, doing the right thing has never felt this disconcerting. Let's see what happens next. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our today's episode. My name is Edwin Austin. This has been QFix Weekly Show. All that is left to say is muchas gracias.